On Thursday, the 26th of March, Sir David Davis spoke in Parliament on the conduct of Cheshire Police, particularly in relation to the Lucy Letby investigation. In this video, we're going to examine that speech and also the reaction of Cheshire Police to the comments of Sir David Davis. So I'm firstly going to look at the response of Cheshire Police to the Sir David Davis speech, which is quite illuminating, really. And then we'll look back at the speech itself and the legitimacy or otherwise of the comments made by Cheshire Police. So they begin by saying here, Cheshire Constabulary strongly refutes all the points made during the adjournment debate. It implied impropriety on the part of Cheshire Constabulary when none whatsoever has been established. So I'll deal with the second sentence first. No impropriety was asserted or implied. What was essentially stated was that Cheshire Police have been incompetent. I myself have stated on this channel that I'm very confident Cheshire Police tried the best that they could at the time of the investigation. They just did a lousy job. It was an incompetent investigation. No one is either asserting or implying impropriety. David Davis didn't do this. David Davis made it very clear that there were enormous mistakes made in this investigation. With regard to the first sentence, Cheshire Constabulary strongly refutes all the points made during the adjournment debate. They seem to be slightly confused about what the word refute means. Refute means to prove a statement or theory to be wrong or false, or to disprove it. What Cheshire Police are actually doing is denying that what David Davis has said is true. They don't refute it, because as we'll see in their statement, they don't raise any relevant points whatsoever. Therefore, it's not a refutation. Now, they may genuinely believe they are refuting it because they're not really very bright. I mean, it sounds harsh for me to say that, but I did say in a previous video, although they've made this allegation about the handover sheets being found in chronological order, I wouldn't be surprised if they don't understand the concept of chronology and they genuinely think it's correct. I mean, it's absolutely, provably, demonstrably not correct, but they may believe that they are in chronological order. Similarly, they may believe this is a refutation. It's not. It's not a refutation. You haven't refuted anything at all. We remain confident in the integrity of the investigation, the conduct of the prosecution, and the decisions reached by the courts. So that really means nothing at all. Firstly, the integrity of the investigation wasn't really being challenged. It was the competence again. No one is saying there was no integrity. I've written very explicitly in my book that I'm certain Cheshire Police tried the best that they could. I've said that on this channel. No one is questioning the integrity. We're questioning the competence. In terms of the conduct of the prosecution, this is possibly a reference to the fact that David Davis highlighted the fact that they tried to make this claim about pyjamas in court, and Cheshire Police knew damn well that that was a lie, and that Lucy Letby had not lied, and that the prosecution was presenting untrue evidence. So, as to whether the conduct of the prosecution was good, bad, or indifferent, it doesn't really matter. We'll get onto that point later on. In terms of the decisions reached by the courts, obviously, Cheshire Police have a massive vested interest in believing those decisions are correct. And even after Lucy Letby is exonerated, no doubt they'll probably still pretend that the court was correct and they were correct, because they're completely lacking in any humility and maturity, as has been made very clear on numerous occasions. Over the past 2 years, the force has come under constant criticism, which is deserved, and it's been intensely scrutinised, which you should be, because you're the police. It's a major investigation. If you'd been intensely scrutinised and you'd done a good job, it would be fine. All scrutiny is holding something to account. It's not a bad thing to hold something to account. And certainly when you're in the position of the police, which is that you can decide who has liberty and who doesn't have liberty, or I should say that you at least play a major role in that process, then naturally what you do should be scrutinised. So you can't complain about intense scrutiny. Indeed, the constant criticism that you mentioned earlier in the sentence is a result of this intense scrutiny. If I and others like me had intensely scrutinised the police and found out that the conduct of Cheshire Police was exemplary, you wouldn't have come under constant criticism. So the reason you've come under constant criticism is because of your own conduct. And I will say again, I've mentioned this in relation to the Operation Hummingbird promotional film that they made, and I'll discuss this further in the future. This does very much is very much redolent of, oh, poor us. Oh, it's been so unfair. Everyone's been picking on us. Oh, it's terrible being in the police. You know, that's what they were saying in the promotional film. I kind of made this joke about, I thought at one stage they were going to say, oh, it was terrible because the coffee machine broke down and we couldn't buy any donuts. Who cares? That's your job. If you don't like it, do something else. No one's forcing you to be in the police. And I did say that when I was interviewing Stephanie Davies and Dr. Steve Watts, and I said all this, and I was really pleased that Dr. Watts agreed with me, because, you know, he could have not agreed as strongly as he did, but he said, you're absolutely right. So this kind of sulking about the fact that you've been criticised, you deserve to be criticised. So I don't have any sympathy for you whatsoever. And then they go, and subject to unpleasant opinion. Not unpleasant opinion, people are criticising you because you're rubbish. You've done a rubbish job on this, and we're going to hear in the future you've done a rubbish job on other cases. And David Davis has mentioned as well other cases previously, historically, that you also did a rubbish job on. Arguably, the Sally Clark case was less your fault than this, although that's debatable. I haven't investigated that in the same depth. But clearly it was another egregious miscarriage of justice. So the notion that this is unpleasant opinion is unpleasant to you. It's not unpleasant to anyone else because everyone else knows that it's true. And then he goes on to say, from a core group of individuals who appear to pride themselves on spreading misinformation, making baseless claims, and attempting to destroy reputations. So we'll come back to the core group and attempting to destroy reputations in a second. In terms of spreading misinformation, we're going to assess that in this video. Secondly, in terms of making baseless claims, David Davis made numerous claims during his parliamentary speech, so we will assess the validity of those claims in this video. In terms of there being a core group of individuals that are supposedly doing these things, spreading misinformation and trying to destroy reputations, no one has any intention of doing that. I don't get any pleasure from criticising Cheshire Police. I'd much prefer it if Cheshire Police had done a good job. The fact is that there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of people now who are scrutinising Cheshire Police, and rightly so, because you made massive mistakes in your investigation. These are well documented. These have now been spoken about in Parliament. So, again, this is a rather self-pitying comment, but fundamentally, if you'd done a good job on the investigation, you wouldn't be experiencing this scrutiny, as you described it. You wouldn't be experiencing this criticism. And it's not a core group. It's not a small group of people. It's a very large number of people now. While scrutiny of policing is legitimate and welcome, well, hold on a second. In the previous passage, you were just complaining about having been placed under intense scrutiny. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say it's not fair because we've been scrutinised, but we welcome being scrutinised. That doesn't make any sense. That's a contradiction in terms. Also, David Davis has addressed the fact that you don't welcome scrutiny in the speech. It is essential that such scrutiny is grounded in fact and does not... Right, so where have you actually made... We're going to get to the end of the statement and we'll see you didn't actually challenge a single thing that was said. So if it wasn't grounded in fact, you'd be able to challenge the facts, would you not? And does not inadvertently cut across due process, ongoing legal considerations, or the independence of the judiciary. Yes, so Cheshire Police are really concerned about the independence of the judiciary and the ongoing legal considerations. It's not clear what the ongoing legal considerations are. Of course, what are the ongoing legal considerations exactly? It seems to me that the assessment of the Lucy Letby case by the Criminal Cases Review Commission and inevitably the Court of Appeal would be improved by knowing the fact that the police investigation was poor. I mean, he's suggesting that's not relevant, or that can unfairly influence the proceedings somehow. Surely it's precisely the kind of information that the Criminal Cases Review Commission needs to know about. I'm not sure. I mean, the rest of it is just really waffle, isn't it? Just repeating the same thing 3 times. The independence of the judiciary, the ongoing legal considerations, and the due process, they're all the same thing. And of course, Cheshire Police are really concerned about these things because they want the legal process to be completed as accurately as possible. It's not a self-serving opinion, of course. Nothing could be further from the truth. The constant noise, so they're just copying Lady Thirlwall's phrase here, surrounding this case, inaccurate or partial information being presented as facts. So what is inaccurate? And what information is partial? You haven't made a single assertion about inaccurate information, and what information is partial. And as I'll go on to mention, most of this information is derived from documents that have been authored by Cheshire Police. So when they say here being presented as fact, well, they're in your documents. So if you're saying your own documents are inaccurate or not factual, then that's fine. But much of this information, in fact, virtually all of it, is either in Cheshire Police documents or it's in other official documents, as we will see. And attempts to hijack the perceived narrative risk. Let's read this whole thing again. I mean, this is a word salad if ever I've seen one. The constant noise surrounding this case, inaccurate or partial information being presented as fact, and attempts to hijack the perceived narrative risk, maybe you should have thrown a comma in there somewhere, risk undermining public confidence not only in this case, but in the wider criminal justice system. So, I don't know what this statement about attempting to hijack the perceived narrative, what does that even mean? It doesn't even mean anything. The perceived narrative, perceived by whom? The general public. Believe me, the general public are going to be extremely critical of Cheshire Police by the time this is over. They already are now. There's going to be more and more and more people that become aware of it. I mean, essentially, this is completely meaningless. However, the one thing I will respond to is the notion of public confidence in the wider criminal justice system. So, firstly, on the screen now, you can see a YouGov poll, and this is about public confidence in the police. So, you can see 3% of respondents had a lot of confidence in the police. 38% had a fair amount of confidence. So you can see from that, a very, very small percentage of people had a lot of confidence, and the majority of people either had not very much confidence or no confidence at all. A small percentage said that they didn't know. But it was the majority that didn't have confidence. And this is the faith in the criminal justice system, almost exactly the same. 4% have a lot of confidence, and the majority have not very much confidence or no confidence at all. So we can... let's go back to what the expression was here. We risk undermining public confidence in the case and the wider criminal justice system. Now, I made a comment on one of Lucy's posts to say, can you undermine something that doesn't exist in the first place? And I would suggest you cannot undermine something that doesn't exist in the first place. Public confidence is best served by evidence-based discussion. I mean, this is all just waffle. This is all completely meaningless waffle, as you can probably tell. Public confidence is best served by evidence-based discussion and responsible commentary. Is that what you've done? Have you engaged in responsible commentary? What about where Paul Hughes said that Lucy enjoyed the trial and that Lucy left things lying around on purpose for you to find? Was that evidence-based discussion and responsible commentary? Not ill-informed personal opinions. I mean, it seems to me that they were the definition of ill-informed personal opinions and inaccurate details. You keep saying things are not factual. You keep saying things are inaccurate. I note that you've yet to bring up a single thing that is inaccurate or not factual or that was incorrect in the speech. We are committed to victim-focused justice, public confidence, and the rule of law. So we know that you're committed to the rule of law because you like convicting people. That's not open to debate. In terms of being committed to public confidence, public confidence is grounded in your actual competence. You can't just say, we want people to be confident in us, and then complain because someone criticised you and say, well, that's not fair because we're committed to public confidence. People will have public confidence in you if you do a good job. If you don't do a good job, there will almost inevitably be less public confidence in you. In terms of victim-focused justice, this is a very telling comment because we already know that Cheshire Police are committed to victim-focused justice, because when they made their promotional film on Operation Hummingbird, they made it very clear in that film that they became far too involved with the families and then considered it their job to get a result for the families, when what they should have been doing was investigating the situation in the Council of Chester. Had they done that competently, or perhaps even properly, or perhaps even at all, then they wouldn't be objected and subjected to what they describe now as this unfair scrutiny. And then obviously a very predictable final comment. Our thoughts remain with the families of the babies who have always been at the heart of this case. We know. I just said that. You basically met the families, and then allowed yourself to become too emotionally involved. All objectivity went out the window. You did an absolutely lousy investigation, and now it's coming home to roost. And I note that you haven't raised a single valid point of any substance in this statement. This statement is just absolute, unending waffle. It has no meaning. It has no relevance to anything that David Davis says. If this is the best you can do, you'd have been better off saying nothing. So I'm now going to go through the parliamentary speech of Sir David Davis. Cheshire Police make all these claims about lack of facts, misleading, incomplete information, etc., etc. So the proof's in the pudding. This is the entire speech we're going to go through. And I've made some comments in bolded writing every so often, and I will go over some of these comments. Well, I'll go over all of the comments, and I'll demonstrate most of them physically. Some of them really don't need to be demonstrated because they're just common knowledge by now. But the speech begins. In 1998, Cheshire Police arrested Sally Clark and charged her with the murder of her 2 baby sons. In 1999, she was convicted of their murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. This conviction and sentence was overturned by the Court of Appeal in 2003 and recognised as a gross miscarriage of justice. She was set free, albeit after 3 years in prison. However, her life had been destroyed. Just 4 years later, she died from alcohol poisoning. The grief had driven her to drink, and it killed her. The destruction of an innocent person's life was caused by the police, the prosecution, and the courts swallowing the bogus statistical assertions by an alleged expert, who's Sir Roy Meadow, in her trial. That expert eventually resigned in disgrace, although that did not save Sally Clark. I've just written note, this is all uncontested. You would think after this, Cheshire Police and the CPS would have been very careful to avoid this happening again, that they would have been very careful to abide by all those rules and guidelines precisely designed to prevent further terrible miscarriages of justice. So let us test exactly that premise. We are uniquely assisted in that process by the fact that the police and prosecution behaviour has been reviewed by 2 separate police officers, both extremely experienced in precisely this sort of case. Firstly, Dr. Steve Watts, a former Assistant Chief Constable who wrote the National Police Guidelines on the Investigation of Deaths in Healthcare Settings, and former Detective Superintendent Stuart Clifton, the officer in charge of the investigation that led to the conviction of Beverly Allett, one of the most prolific child murderers in healthcare history. He was commissioned by the Sun newspaper actually to confirm Letby's guilt. Indeed, both policemen believed that Letby was guilty, that is, until they examined the hard facts. Both now agree. They both believe that the Letby case is a serious miscarriage of justice. So let us analyse the prosecution of this case forensically, using as a reference proper police procedure, prosecutorial standards, medical murder investigation guidelines, CPS guidance, the evidence from the Thirlwall inquiry, and the considered critiques from these 2 experienced police officers. The neonatal unit at the Council of Chester Hospital was failing. Its medical management was, at best, inadequate, at worst, appalling. Indeed, the unit was downgraded a week after Letby was suspended and prevented from taking any more very, very seriously ill babies. I didn't make a note here, actually, but I mean, this is not open to debate. Before the police investigation, numerous reviews looked at the Council of Chester Hospital and found no evidence of criminal activity. The most salient of these was by the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, who found no criminal events but did identify numerous shortcomings in medical care at the hospital. Cheshire Police ignored this, and I've made a note, Evans hand-waved this, and the jury was never informed of it. This is a known fact. It's known that the Royal College report was not allowed in court. So I'm going to show you a few documents just to confirm here that what David Davis says is absolutely true. So firstly, Sonia Bayliss here, who works for Cheshire Police, makes this comment about what samples have been retained by the hospital, what tests have been conducted so far, as well as reports produced. So she's aware that there can be reports produced and that this should be deemed of relevance, as you would naturally expect. Now, before we go into this any further, let's just note what the attitude of Dr. Evans was to the Royal College. He stated, "I understand that the Royal College has been involved, but from my experience, the police are far better at investigating this sort of problem." So that shows a kind of very strange attitude for a paediatrician towards the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, and that's emblematic of the attitude that he then shows to the reports. Because he then says, very early on in the investigation, I think that the best, possibly the only way to look at the issues is to start from scratch and look at the clinical notes. I mean, no disrespect to previous reviews, it's just better this way. One needs to avoid groupthink. So he didn't look at the previous reports, he hand-waved the notion that he should look at the Royal College reports, and naturally the police just uncritically accepted this. Dr. Watts notes the Royal College report, and I quote, raised significant concerns about systemic failings. Its exclusion from court meant alternative explanations were suppressed. So this has all been gone over previously. I'm not going to go over this again. This was discussed in court very explicitly, and the judge excluded this document. That's known to be the case. Let's all remember this was a neonatal unit with no neonatal specialist consultants, early general paediatricians, merely, I should say, general paediatricians. Furthermore, the trust had dismissed all the experienced advanced neonatal nurse practitioners to save money, and there was a 20% staffing shortfall. So these are all known facts. It's also notable that the police didn't uncover or even attempt to uncover this, and the court and jury never heard about it. Doctors did ward rounds twice a week rather than twice a day, and I put no known fact cited in the Royal College report. You think of the fragility of these children, and yet they only got seen twice a week. There were outbreaks of multiple antibiotic-resistant infections, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, MRSA, and C. difficile. Obviously, there's also Stenotrophes multifida, there's enterovirus, and I'll just show the documentation for some of the lesser-known resistant infections briefly here. So in this meeting, public meeting of the Board of Directors, this is where MRSA and C. difficile are mentioned. I've been over the other infections on the ward countless times. No one disputes that these exist. That it's all in the Thirlwall documents as well. Those bacteria were all detected in the hospital. Sewage was dripping from the ceilings. So I've made a note that this is documented, so I'll just show this briefly as well. So this was the article by Professor David Livermore, who's been a guest on the channel. Nappy pads on ceiling sewage leaks. Did infection kill the Letby babies? This has also been reported by the Daily Telegraph, been confirmed by sources. This is not open to debate. Then Sir David Davis said doctors followed poor infection control processes. My note here is that obviously attaching nappy pads to the ceiling is one indicator of this. It is difficult to demonstrate this in a short period of time, but the presence of so much infection is pretty strong evidence of this without going into all of the details. The mother of 3 triplets who moved to Liverpool Women's Hospital, and I quote, noticed the different levels of cleanliness compared to the Countess of Chester. There were clear hygiene protocols in Liverpool. We were told to wash our hands before entering the unit, and then again before entering the room, which was not the case at the Countess of Chester. So I will just show you this being documented during the Thirlwall inquiry. So here we have this statement. On the ward, Father O, A, O, and P and R, and I noticed a different level of cleanliness compared to the Countess of Chester Hospital. There were clear hygiene protocols. We were told to wash our hands before entering the unit and again before entering the room. Standard procedure, etc., etc. Exactly what Sir David Davis said in Parliament. It's also notable that there were 12 stillbirths in hospital at the same time as the spike in neonatal deaths. So this is also documented, so I'll show you the documentation for this. So this is a document that's in the Thirlwall inquiry again. It's a document from the Countess of Chester Hospital, at the time. As you can see, they can't scan the documents straight. You'll see that in further documents that we're going to look at later, but you can still see that it says 18 cases were identified of either stillbirth or neonatal death. So there were 6 neonatal deaths at this point in time. So as stated by David Davis, there were 12 stillbirths. That is an established fact. Again, it is documented. So it continues. I'll read the whole sentence, actually. It's also notable that there were 12 stillbirths in hospital at the same time as the spike in neonatal deaths, stillbirths that Lucy Letby was nowhere near. This was also ignored by Cheshire Police. So why did Cheshire Police decide Letby was responsible? Initially, there was no intention to launch any criminal investigation, but on the 15th of May 2017, that all changed after a single meeting with 2 consultants, Dr. Stephen Breary and Dr. Ravi Jayaram. At this point, Letby was explicitly identified as the focus of suspicion. Again, this is all documented. I've been over it many times on this channel, but we'll look at the documents for this again briefly. So this was the statement made by Cheshire Police on the 5th of May when the case had initially been referred to them by the Council of Chester Hospital. I've obviously highlighted this many times, and many of you will be familiar with this, that there was a high statistical relationship between a member of the nursing staff and babies deteriorating. There is no evidence other than coincidence. 10 days later, Dr. Stephen Breary, Dr. Ravi Jayaram, who are about to be named by Sir David Davis in his parliamentary speech, also Dr. Susie Holt, who he didn't name. She's something of a peripheral figure, but I've made a video about her as well. During this meeting, as we've established, as I've been over many times, they explicitly pointed the finger at Lucy Letby. They identified her. There could be no doubt that they were referring to Lucy Letby, and that was at this meeting on the 15th of May. So that's another statement made by Sir David Davis that is not only factually correct, but we only know that it's factually correct because it's contained in documents that were compiled by Cheshire Police and that are in the Thirlwall inquiry. Sir David Davis continues. Dr. Watt states in this meeting, the language of this very experienced, very senior detective from the Cheshire Police Force moved from a measured, rational, professional tone to inappropriately emotional. He cites the senior Cheshire Police detective to say, and I quote, "I can't describe how powerful it was. I just felt for those professionals there. I think we all owe them this." And again, this is documented. I will show you exactly when Nigel Wenham made these comments. So this is Nigel Wenham speaking at the Thirlwall inquiry, saying the meeting was, I can't describe how powerful it was. They were knowledgeable. They spoke from the point of view whereby they were dealing with these things in real time, and they have lived and have breathed these events for the last several years, and I just felt for those professionals there. They had an opportunity now to just speak to someone and be listened to and believed what they were saying, and it felt as though that we weren't just going to push them away like they had been in the past or threatened or intimidated, which is what the perception is they had. They were just very powerful in what they were saying and committed, and I think we all owe them a great deal for coming forward and speaking out the way they did. Notice that all of this could have occurred for Lucy Letby. They could have done all this for Lucy Letby, but they never did. So anyway, that's another thing that Sir David Davis stated during the parliamentary speech that is simply factual. It's undeniable. So Sir David Davis continues. Dr. Watts observes that within 24 hours of that meeting, Operation Hummingbird was up and running. That is the name of the Letby operation. Within 3 days, news of the investigation into a potential murder at the Council of Chester was in the national press. And I've just written note, I'm not going to demonstrate this on this occasion, but we saw multiple media articles in previous videos. We know that this is the case. It was the 18th of May article in The Guardian in which Dr. Evans claims to have first learnt about the case. I mean, this is not contestable. This investigation was initiated by a single meeting with consultants who had themselves been involved in seriously inadequate care of these babies. The consultants who pointed the finger at Letby were Dr. Stephen Breary, Dr. John Gibbs, Dr. Ravi Jayaram, and one anonymised doctor for the court's own reasons. An anonymised doctor demonstrated poor care. One had wrongly punctured a baby's liver. That baby later died. So again, this is documented, and we'll go over the documentation for this now. So here we have the rather infamous incident with Dr. Stephen Breary, in which there was this mistake made with the insertion of an intravenous cannula line, and a small amount of blood was obtained, which was sent for a blood culture. And this is the incident to which Sir David Davis is referring. So this is once again documented. One was found by a coroner to be responsible for the death of a child after a breathing tube was inserted into the esophagus rather than trachea, the gullet rather than the windpipe. One pushed an endotracheal tube into one baby's lungs, leaving the other collapsed. That baby later died. So this has again been documented. I'll just go over that again briefly. So this is a report in Private Eye on the sad passing of Noah Robinson. I'll just read this out. In 2015, an inquest into the death of baby Noah Robinson found counter to the chest that doctors had wrongly intubated the esophagus twice, and clear signs it was misplaced were ignored. Dr. Tariq Ali, a consultant neonatal and paediatric anaesthetist, reviewed the court transcript from Letby's first trial and spotted a pattern of intubation failures with babies C, G, K, and N. We now know that the consultant who was responsible for the mistake with Noah Robinson was the anonymised doctor mentioned by Sir David Davis. So that is yet another thing that is documented. So Sir David Davis continues. One clearly misled the jury, claiming he had virtually caught Lucy Letby. Those were the words, virtually caught Letby doing nothing, as a baby collapsed in front of her, evidence that his own emails disproved. Of course, this is Dr. Jayaram and the virtually red-handed claim that was made in court. Again, what Sir David Davis is saying here is documented. So this is a summary of the Unheard article, authored by David Rose. And in this, there's the newly uncovered email in which Dr. Jayaram contradicts his later testimony, re baby K. We all know this to be the case. It's been well established. Again, Sir David Davis is completely correct in his assertion. So Sir David Davis continues. These doctors themselves could very well have contributed to the spikes in deaths attributed to Letby. Dr. Watts again poses an important question. Where was the decision not to treat the doctors as suspects, or other nurses, or cleaners? So I've written here, we don't know for certain that the doctors weren't treated as suspects, but this can be very strongly inferred from everything that we do know about the investigation. It would indeed be extraordinary at this point if Cheshire Police were able to produce some documentary evidence that they did consider the consultants to be suspects, considering that they swallowed every word that the consultants told them uncritically. Obviously, the onus is on them to produce some documentation which disproves our very well-founded suspicions, and suspicions which are indeed based on documents produced by Cheshire Police themselves. So Sir David Davis continues. Justice demands that the police look at everyone. It does not permit them to fixate on one individual and build a case solely around them. And Dr. Watts makes plain that's not just a moral requirement, that's the law. Section 23(1)(a) of the Criminal Procedure and Investigations Act 1996 requires, and I quote, that where a criminal investigation is conducted, all reasonable steps are taken for the purpose of the investigation, and in particular, all reasonable lines of inquiry are pursued. So once again, this is documented, this is in black and white in writing, so I will show you this once again. So this is the aforementioned extract from this procedural act that was published in 1996. The Secretary of State shall prepare a code of practice containing provisions designed to secure that where a criminal investigation is conducted, all reasonable steps are taken for the purposes of the investigation, and in particular, all reasonable lines of inquiry are pursued. So that is simply a fact. It's a documented fact. It can't possibly be contested. So David Davis continues. Or paragraph 3.5 of the Code of Practice under that Act states in conducting an investigation, the investigator should pursue all reasonable lines of inquiry, whether these point towards or away from the suspect. So I've again noted that this is documented, so I'll show you this code of practice reference. So you can see again here, paragraph 3.5, in conducting an investigation, the investigator should pursue all reasonable lines of inquiry, whether these point towards or away from the suspect. What is reasonable in each case will depend on the particular circumstances. It is a matter for the investigator, with the assistance of the prosecutor if required, to decide what constitutes a reasonable line of inquiry in each case. So we can see that this was not done. We've seen no evidence this ever occurred. We know there was this hypothesis of Lucy Letby is guilty. They never looked at anything else. There's no indication they ever looked at anything else. And again, this is a documented fact that Sir David Davis has raised during his speech. Sir David Davis continues, Cheshire Police did not follow the letter of the law or best professional practice. Dr. Watts states that CPS guidelines and police guidance on the investigation of death in healthcare settings require that decisions in sensitive, serious and complex cases are referred to CPS Serious Crime and Counter-Terrorism Division, and remember, Dr. Watts is the country's leading expert in this area. I quote, it appears self-evident that this case falls into all the relevant categories of sensitivity, seriousness and complexity. However, the regional CPS, that's Merseyside and Cheshire in this case, the regional CPS unit made the charging decisions in this case. So again, this is documented. Let me show you documented evidence of this. So this is an article in The Guardian. There are many different documents available to show that what David Davis is saying is true. But here we see on the back of the CPS decision, those families will need to pursue other channels to get the answers. Afterwards, Jonathan Storer, the Chief Crown Prosecutor at CPS Mersey, Cheshire, said these decisions on whether to seek retrials on the remaining counts of attempted murder were extremely complex and difficult. So this is just one of many documents where you see this CPS Mersey Cheshire representative speaking, again confirming that what David Davis was saying is completely correct. Now, this requirement is made plain actually in the current version of CPS referrals, approvals and notifications guidance, which states in terms of homicide allegations involving 4 or more victims, and medical authority should be passed on to the Special Crime Division. You may not be surprised to learn that this is documented as well. So this is an extract from an official document on special crime and counter-terrorism, and you see here CPS areas, divisions and directorates must refer all the following cases to be handled in the Special Crime Division. These are listed below based on their complexity, sensitivity and expertise. Indicators of complexity includes disasters or homicide allegations involving 4 or more victims, and medical authorities such as NHS, NHS trusts and hospitals. Once again, this is documented, and what David Davis said was absolutely correct. So continue from here. The Counter-Terrorism and Special Crime Division is a unit in London, basically, that specialises in these complicated cases. Plainly, Cheshire Police believe that there are a lot more than 4 victims, so this case should automatically have gone to the Special Crime Division. So we've just looked at this. This is just simply a fact. Failure to refer the case meant that proper safeguards and specialist scrutiny by independent lawyers who had not been closely associated with the investigating team were never implemented. That's very important. Independent and not associated with the original investigating team. When a Special Crime and Counter-Terrorism Division was involved earlier this year, when Cheshire Police put 11 additional charges to them, it's notable that they turned them down flat. The Special Crime and Counter-Terrorism Division stated, and I quote, the evidential test was not met in any of those cases. So this is a documented fact. I won't bother showing this on the screen as it's so well established, no one could possibly disagree with this. Now, after failing to refer the case to the correct CPS unit, Cheshire Police then failed to listen to explicit guidance from the National Crime Agency. And again, Dr. Watts points out that on the 26th of May 2017, an email record indicates that the NCA advised Cheshire Police to appoint a panel of relevant experts. They clearly defined the disciplines and provided a comprehensive list. There were forensic and neonatal pathologists, forensic toxicologist and/or clinical pharmacologist, a nurse with experience of special baby units, a medical expert with experience on the working practices on a special unit for neonates, an obstetrician and experts to review the medical statistics. The advice was national best practice, but Cheshire Police ignored it. So we've been over this previously on the channel. This is again documented. I will just show you the documents that demonstrate this. So as I've read this out before, I'm not going to read the whole thing again, but we see in the leaked documents from Cheshire Police all of these things being mentioned by the National Crime Agency, and we know that none of them were ever involved with the Operation Hummingbird investigation. Lucy Letby was arrested entirely on the basis of evidence provided by Dr. Evans. We know that for a fact because this was stated in a Daily Mail podcast by Paul Hughes. He also stated that he'd basically decided Lucy was guilty by this point, and we know why none of these people were appointed, because Dr. Evans said he did not think it was necessary to consider additional expert opinion. He was allowed to do everything. Cheshire Police didn't stop him. Cheshire Police just allowed him to do whatever he wanted. So this is another comment by Sir David Davis in Parliament that is documented, that is just simply factual. On 28th of June 2017, to return to the comments of Sir David Davis, the NCA advisors followed up with a list of potential experts who could fill those posts. Cheshire Police blatantly ignored this too. Instead of drawing up a multidisciplinary panel, Dr. Watts states, and I quote, "Operation Hummingbird built its entire medical case around one expert. That so-called expert was Dr. Dewi Evans, and the warning signs were there before the trial started." So this is of course documented. I've documented this early in the video. Dr. Watts believes that Cheshire Police were clutching at straws to find an expert, and then very quickly and uncritically took a lifeline offered by Evans. Evans ran a business providing expert medical advice in court cases for a high fee. We can identify at least £80,000 paid for the Letby case, but the rest is concealed. A true total is likely many times higher. So this is documented, but I'm not going to go over this as it's uncontested and it's undeniable that Evans will have been paid hundreds of thousands of pounds. Evans stated, "This was extra money which helped me keep my daughter in horses, my son in cars." No, again, I won't show this, but this is an almost infamous remark. That was his motivation. So he approached the NCA after reading about the case and called it my kind of case. Again, I won't show this. It's another infamous remark. It was a headline in The Guardian. No one can seriously contest this. Dr. Watts points out that a backdoor approach by an alleged expert who is clearly looking for work should have sounded warning bells for the senior investigating officer and the investigating team. As an expert witness for decades, Evan boasted he had never lost a case. Another infamous remark that I'm not going to bother demonstrating because, yet again, it's not contestable. That is not the mindset of a neutral expert. It's the language of someone who tailors his evidence to suit the prosecution's case. This was clearly demonstrated when another very senior judge took the extraordinary step of writing to the presiding judge in the Letby case, alerting him of Evans' failings in a previous case. I think the House should understand quite how unusual it is for a judge to take that step. Lord Justice Jackson described Evans' evidence as, and I quote, "worthless," stating, and again I quote, "he makes no effort to provide a balanced opinion, and his approach amounts to a breach of proper professional conduct." So again, this is another infamous quote that I won't show because everyone is already aware of it, and again, no one can possibly contest this. Indeed, it was brought up during the court case. I think later on he also called it tendentious, terrifying when his single opinion will condemn a young woman to life in prison. Then when Cheshire Police asked Evans if they should follow NCA guidance and seek other expert witnesses, he said, "I do not think it's necessary to consider additional expert opinion at this stage." So I've already shown this earlier in the video. Evans was appointed both as the police advisor and expert witness in the trial. Stuart Clifton states, "It's illogical to allow evidence to both advise and be the principal prosecution witness, as there is a clear conflict of interest." If this was not warning enough to Cheshire Police, it should have set alarm bells ringing when Evans declared after just 10 minutes of reviewing the case notes that he suspected there was foul play. So this is yet another infamous statement that is not contested, and he repeated it, suggesting that it took him less than 10 minutes during a BBC Panorama interview. Dr. Watts states Evans was not independently selected, but came forward himself. and validators used to assess his opinions were themselves selected without adequate independence by Evans himself. What's more, as Stuart Clifton said, it's completely illogical to allow other experts to view the findings of Evans, since experts are expected to give evidence of their findings and not be corrupted by others. So I've just said, once again, this is documented. Another prosecution expert, Professor Hindmarsh, was dismissed from his post as honorary consultant at the Great Ormond Street Hospital just before he gave evidence at the trial, and during the trial, whilst he was giving evidence, he faced a GMC investigation for failures of expertise and posing a risk to his patients. An expert witness chastised for failure of expertise. The jury knew nothing of this. So I will go over this again. This is documented. It's not in any way contentious, but I will go over these details. So I'll go through the recent articles on Hindmarsh. This is one, both published in The Guardian. Lucy Letby case, expert witness was under fitness to practice investigation during trial. The jury was never told about this, as noted in the subheadline. Excuse me. A doctor who gave crucial expert evidence about insulin poisoning for the prosecution of the nurse Lucy Letby was under investigation by the medical regulator at the time due to serious concerns about his fitness to practice. The General Medical Council opened an investigation into concerns about Professor Peter Hindmarsh, including that he had harmed patients on the first day he gave evidence at Letby's trial in late 2022. The GMC investigation was still continuing when Hindmarsh gave evidence for a second time at the Letby trial 3 months later. Great Ormond Street Hospital reported Hindmarsh to the GMC after a formal investigation led by his main employer, University College London Hospitals Trust. The jury in the trial of the nurse who was convicted of murdering babies in the Council of Chester Hospital's neonatal unit was never informed about any investigation into Hindmarsh, one of the prosecution's key witnesses. While the GMC conducted its investigation, and during some of the period when Hindmarsh gave evidence, a medical tribunal ordered severe restrictions on his work, saying that he may pose a real risk to members of the public. The tribunal also considered the allegations about Hindmarsh may have the potential to impact on his ability to act as an expert witness. Nevertheless, the tribunal permitted him to continue giving expert evidence for the prosecution of Letby. The Crown Prosecution Service told the defence it would oppose any attempt to inform the jury of the GMC investigation on the basis that the allegations had not reached a final adjudication. And then this is another article. Expert witness in Lucy Letby trial did not reveal hospital investigation into his medical work. The police force behind the prosecution of the former nurse Lucy Letby has said it was not informed by a key expert witness before he gave evidence at her trial that he was under investigation over serious concerns in his medical work. The Crown Prosecution Service also told The Guardian it was not aware that Professor Peter Hindmarsh was subject to the formal investigation by the hospital that employed him before his first appearance as a witness on the 25th of November 2022. So not only is this documented, but I would assume that Cheshire Police would not contest this point. So then David Davis said, another prosecution expert, Dr. Bohin, reviewed Evans' work. She faced numerous complaints from her patients' families and later was criticised for ignoring a key symptom in one of her patients. Again, this is documented, and I'm also going to go over another point from earlier in this speech as well. So firstly, I just want to reference that David Davis mentioned earlier in his speech the fact that Evans handed over his reports and statements and conclusions to Dr. Bohin, and that was the peer review. That's absolutely true. Here it is, documented in the Court of Appeal verdict. I've mentioned this numerous times on this channel previously. That's not in any way contentious. Again, it cannot be contested. And then this is about Dr. Bohin. Members of two local families have publicly raised their concerns about consultant paediatrician and expert witness Dr. Sandy Bohin, whose testimony was used to prosecute Lucy Letby. They spoke at a conference focused on the convicted murderer's case and calls for review of the evidence on Saturday. The individuals who wish to remain anonymous delivered presentations outlining their ordeals in trying to secure correct diagnosis and treatments for their ill children across multiple encounters with Dr. Bohin. Outlining their ordeals, the families said they wished to share what they had experienced with Dr. Bohin, including repeated misdiagnosis of symptoms and blocking opportunities for referrals. They were invited to speak on Saturday as part of the conference, with the ultimate objective of contributing to an overhaul of expert witness selection and usage in the British legal system. Dr. Sandy Bohin, as a consequence of this, will stand down from her work in Guernsey early next year. The consultant paediatrician, who has worked for the medical specialist group since 2009, has told her bosses that she intends to retire in March. Her decision to retire has followed controversies around her involvement in the prosecution of Lucy Letby and an ongoing dispute with tens of families who say they've made complaints around her work in the island. The MSG and Dr. Bowen say they are unaware of many of these complaints. So we return to the comments of David Davis. These are the supposed experts that Cheshire Police and CPS chose, rather than a panel of independent experts from all relevant disciplines, as the NCA had advised 3 times. Cheshire Police's due diligence failed, if indeed they attempted it at all. Now, crucial to the case against Letby was the infamous shift table presented as evidence that she was on duty for all the incidents when babies collapsed or died. Over a period of 13 months, there were 17 deaths, far more than the normal 3 or 4. Now, Stuart Clifton states, missing from the chart used at trial are deaths which occurred while Letby was not on duty, or those where adverse events took place while off duty. Cheshire Police, who compiled the table, chose to highlight only the shifts during which Letby was present, disregarding similar events when she was not. The 7 deaths charged as murders were, in effect, selected because she happened to be on duty, as Stuart Clifton bluntly puts it. Evans cherry-picked the cases to match Letby's shifts, and police used this in their chart to reflect her presence at those events, highlighted by Evans. So I've written as a note here, it is difficult to document this in a succinct fashion. It is well known that the shift chart has no merit whatsoever, and it has been thoroughly discredited by this point in time. I have been over the evidence related to this in many previous videos. It is not tenable to question or challenge this assertion. And I should probably add that no statistician has attempted to do that, while numerous statisticians have now completely trashed the shift chart. One has to wonder just how we settled on those children where Letby was present. Any qualified statistician could have pointed this out to Cheshire Police. In fact, one did. In April 2018, a police officer approached one of the country's leading statisticians, Professor Jane Hutton, asking her to put a figure on the likelihood of a nurse being on duty during all the deaths and collapses on the unit. It's almost a rerun of the Sally Clark argument. Cheshire Police had signed a consultancy agreement with Professor Hutton. Professor Hutton warned them that their whole approach was wrong. The police then told the prosecution that the prosecutor has instructed us not to pursue this avenue any further. Professor Hutton challenged them, and the prosecutor told them to settle. And I've just written as a note here, again, this is all thoroughly documented and not contested. It's been in the national media, and furthermore, I have of course had Jane as a guest on the channel, where she went into all of this in great detail. So it cannot possibly be contested once again. This falls in direct contravention of Part 3.3 of the Code for Crown Prosecutors, which states, and I quote, prosecutors cannot direct the police or other investigators. So we will go over this section of the Crown Prosecutor Code now. So here we have section 3.3. Prosecutors cannot direct the police or other investigators. Simple as that. So there's not a lot else to say about that. That is the reference that was made by Sir David Davis. Dr. Wachs added that this occurrence is particularly egregious. It's not appropriate for the CPS to deter the police from acquiring evidence that may be relevant and available. And Dr. Watts goes on, the Criminal Procedure and Investigations Act 1996 is binding upon the CPS to the same extent as the police. For the CPS to instruct the police to ignore potentially relevant evidence would clearly be a breach of the CPIA. Once again, this is documented and we will go over this briefly. So here we have the relevant section. The Secretary of State shall prepare a code of practice containing provisions designed to secure that where a criminal investigation is conducted, all reasonable steps are taken for the purposes of the investigation, and in particular, all reasonable lines of inquiry are pursued. But neither the defence nor the jury was told of Professor Hutton's explicit warnings to the police, unsurprising really, because this obliterated the prosecutor's statistical argument, the foundation of their entire case. So I didn't actually make a note about this, but I've documented numerous times that inferences from this chart were made throughout the prosecution case. Professor Hutton believes the statistical errors are similar to those in the Sally Clark case, but worse. Note, this is not contested. I wrote to the Chief Constable about how those bogus statistics have been compiled. He refused to answer any of my questions that I had raised and said he would, quote, not be providing any further detail or engaging in ongoing correspondence. So I've written here as a note that I can't really comment about this too much, except to say that I happen to know it's true. So much for transparency and welcoming challenge. This refusal to answer questions from a Member of Parliament sits uneasily alongside his department's extraordinary PR campaign, one which at very least invaded the privacy rights of Letby's parents. I simply said, no, this cannot be contested. I thank the Honourable Lady for that point, so this is in response to Esther McVeigh. But in many ways, the reason the Lucy Letby case is so important, over and above the fact it's a miscarriage of justice, is that it highlights weaknesses in the appeal procedure, in the procedure for selecting and managing experts, and it also demonstrates, I'm afraid, that the regulations put in place by the CPIA and other acts of Parliament were not followed in this case, and that's one of the fundamental problems today, and I'll come back to some of the solutions to this in a moment, but that's the central difficulty now. None of this can be reasonably contested again. Finally, there is the question that comes back to the checking issue that she quite rightly raises. There's the question of how the police force should properly handle very complex cases like this, and Dr. Watts is clear, significant investigations such as Operation Hummingbird should be subject to rigorous review by independent detectives, typically from an independent police force. And best practice indicates that the officers conducting the review should be unknown to members of the investigation team, and if such a review had been in place, it's unlikely that any of the breaches I've just talked about so far would have actually happened. So again, this is not something that can reasonably be contested. Now, I don't have time in this debate to hold the House for 20 minutes to list every egregious failure by Cheshire Police, but given the Netflix broadcast a while ago, I want to pick up on the way they actually treated Lucy Letby herself. You see, they arrested Lucy Letby 3 times, claiming it was necessary for questioning, despite her freely volunteering to come in for questioning. So again, this is well documented. I'm not going to go over this, but it's in the Netflix documentary that Lucy was in contact with Cheshire Police in March 2017 at the latest, before they met with Breary and Jayaram. This was voluntarily provided by Cheshire Police themselves, so I would imagine that they wouldn't contest this. And Dr. Watts said, remember, an Assistant Chief Constable said, this is completely wrong. It's also extraordinary. This unthreatening young girl was marched in handcuffs, mirroring the way American authorities try to influence public opinion against subjects when they are perp-walked to court. Dr. Watts says, again, the intelligence about Lucy Letby was that she was non-violent. There was absolutely no justification for her to be handcuffed on those occasions. So I've written, this is an opinion, but I don't see how anyone could reasonably contest this. Of course, some of these things are also factual. It's factual, for example, that Lucy had been signing in at the police station as part of her bail conditions. So it does seem that this is a massive overreaction, and that would be the most generous thing that you could possibly say about it. Letby was also accused in court of lying about being arrested in her pyjamas, but the recent Netflix documentary proves that she was telling the truth. So this has become infamous by now. I'm not going to show the footage because it's in the Netflix documentary and everyone's seen it. No one can reasonably contest this. It's astonishing that the police and the court, who knew how she was dressed when she was arrested, did not intervene with prosecutors to tell them they had got it wrong, but left the jury to believe that Lucy was lying about something when she was plainly telling the truth. So I've added as a note here that although it's implied from this statement, it should also be mentioned that numerous police officers who knew that what the prosecution was saying was untrue sat and watched the prosecution say this in court, obviously, as we know, without intervention. Frankly, it's astounding the lengths that Cheshire Police were willing to go to manage their own public relations, sometimes, I think, at the cost of achieving justice. So here we have it. Despite warning signs of the Sally Clark case, we see that Cheshire Police have either ignored or broken the rules, disregarding relevant safeguards time and time again. They failed to pursue alternative lines of inquiry. They failed to refer the case to the appropriate specialist authorities. They failed to conduct proper due diligence on the appointment of key expert witnesses. They failed to engage with real experts about complex statistical evidence and failed to correctly inform the jury of that fact. They failed on several occasions to disclose critical material to the defence on the evidence before us. There have been clear and serious departures from statutory guidance and multiple deviations from best professional practice because of the way this was handled. I've just written note, this is a summary of the speech. We have already proved every single point. The police should, and I would recommend them to provide Letby's defence team with a whole series of documentation. I'll publish a full list online because of time, but it would include the Senior Investigation Officer's policy books and decision books, records of identified lines of inquiry, logs kept by functional managers, minutes of all the meetings held from the team meetings right up to the gold coordination meetings that would at least start to demonstrate what went wrong here. Irrespective of how Cheshire Police respond, I should tell the Minister. I shall be writing to the Director of Public Prosecutions about these issues and asking him to review the behaviour both of the CPS and the police. And those are the closing comments of Sir David Davis. So let's return to the initial comments of Cheshire Constabulary. So they made this, I would say, illiterate claim that they strongly refute all the points made during the adjournment debate. Of course, they cannot have refuted all the points because they haven't responded to any of them. This is not a refutation, this is a denial. And the only way for them to refute the points is to release these documents that are outlined here. The Senior Investigating Officer's policy books and decision books, records of identified lines of inquiry, logs kept by functional managers, minutes of all the meetings held, from the team meetings right up to the gold coordination meetings. The thing is, if they release those documents, it would not refute all the points, it would just ending up confirming everything that we suspect to be the case. Because when they released their statement, they didn't respond to a single point made in the speech of Sir David Davis because, as we've seen in this video, every single point is documented. And not only documented, the overwhelming majority of the points are documented in documents that we've already seen that emanate from Cheshire Police. Since the comments made by Cheshire Police, Sir David Davis has responded. I am unsurprised by the response from Cheshire Police. This is entirely consistent with their behaviour throughout. He then repeated a call made in his speech saying if Cheshire Police believe they have behaved entirely appropriately, they should provide investigation documents to Letby's lawyers, including Senior Officer Policy and Decision books, records of identified lines of inquiry and potential suspects, and notes of meetings with expert witnesses and the National Crime Agency. I've also received this official statement from the 19 Nurses campaign group. 19 Nurses, a collective of over 900 health professionals, formally endorsed the parliamentary adjournment speech delivered by Sir David Davis concerning the police handling of the Lucy Letby case. We share the serious concerns raised regarding how the police conducted this investigation. 19 Nurses sent similar concerns to Chester Police and the Chief Constable. In light of this, we respectfully call upon the Police and Crime Commissioner to undertake an independent review of police conduct and decision-making in this matter to ensure accountability and restore confidence in the handling of such critical concerns. And I've left this point until last, but it's a very, very important point. Cheshire Police make this comment here about constant noise and about the risk of hijacking and undermining public confidence, blah, blah, blah. Essentially, this is a direct response to a speech made in Parliament. It is not their place to comment on the democratic process. It's not their business, it's not their place, and I would suggest they're not intellectually qualified to do so. So David Davis is perfectly entitled to say whatever he wants in Parliament. He has parliamentary privilege, and I'm sure that Cheshire Police are aware that they cannot do anything about that. If he has made points that they believe to be incorrect, then, as they have suggested that they will do, they are in a position to refute them. They can make actual material refutations of the points made by David Davis. Of course, they cannot actually do this because, as we've seen in this video, everything that David Davis said is completely true. The police claim that there's a core group of people spreading misinformation, but were unable to point to even one item of misinformation. They were unable to bring forward even one substantial or material argument about anything said in the speech of Sir David Davis. The reason for that being, as we've proved in this video, everything he said is true and is documented almost entirely in documents provided by Cheshire Police themselves to the Thirlwall inquiry. The ball is firmly in the court of Cheshire Police. If they wish to make claims that there is a campaign of misinformation, these seem to be pretty specious claims to say the least, then they need to prove this. They have the documents, they can release the documents. If they do not release the documents, then they can't expect to be taken seriously.